Emily Grace was a woman who lived in the quiet spaces left behind. At 38, she taught children about faith and kindness, but her own heart was a barren land. The laughter of her students was a distant echo of a joy she once knew, a joy that had vanished with the small, gentle breath of her child. The loss was a hollow ache, a constant companion in the empty rooms of her house. It was a silence that God, it seemed, could no longer fill. She would pray, her words falling like stones into a bottomless well, and hear nothing back. It was as if the phone line to heaven had been cut, and she was left alone with the static of her sorrow. Her husband Mark had tried to bridge the chasm between them, but his grief wore a different face, one of silence and distance. He sought solace not in her arms, but in the quiet companionship of another. The betrayal was not a loud, dramatic storm, but a slow, creeping frost that froze the last remnants of warmth in their home. Emily saw it not as a failing of a man, but as another abandonment. Another door closed by a universe she no longer understood. Her faith, once a sturdy oak, was now a sapling in a hurricane, its roots torn from the soil. She felt spiritually lost, a ship without a rudder, drifting on an endless sea of why. The days bled into one another, a watercolor painting of gray and blue. She would stand before her class, speaking of miracles and divine love, while her own soul felt like a forgotten miracle. The children's innocent questions about heaven felt like tiny daggers to her heart. How could she explain a place she was no longer sure she believed in? How could she teach about a loving God when all she felt was his profound absence? Her life had become a performance of faith, a mask she wore to hide the cavernous emptiness within. She was a teacher of light living in her own private darkness. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, she found herself walking without direction. Her feet, seemingly with a will of their own, led her to an old, forgotten part of town. There, nestled between a shuttered bookstore and a laundromat, was a door she had never seen before. It was simple, wooden, with a small brass plaque that read, "The Wish Room of Truth." There was no explanation, no advertisement, just an invitation into the unknown. With nothing left to lose, and a sliver of desperate curiosity, Emily pushed the door open and stepped out of the world she knew. The world outside vanished the moment the door clicked shut. Emily found herself not in a dusty shop, but in a space that seemed to breathe with soft, ethereal light. The room was circular with no visible windows or corners, just walls that shimmered like mother of pearl. The air was still and warm, filled with a gentle hum that resonated deep in her chest, like a forgotten lullaby. It was a place outside of time, a sanctuary from the relentless ticking of the clock that marked the days since her world had fallen apart. For the first time in months, the crushing weight on her shoulders seemed to lighten, just a little. In the center of this luminous space stood a single, elegant table carved from what looked like polished obsidian. It was sleek and black, absorbing and reflecting the light in a mesmerizing dance. Upon its surface, a deck of cards lay fanned out, each one glowing with a soft, internal golden light. They were not playing cards, but something far more profound. As Emily drew closer, she could feel a gentle pull, a quiet energy humming from the table. It was an invitation, a silent question being asked of her soul. What did she truly want? What was the deepest cry of her broken heart? She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers hovering just above the glowing cards. As she did, words began to materialize on their surfaces, shimmering into existence like heat haze on a summer road. These were not random fortunes or playful predictions. They were her own wishes, her most secret and painful desires, pulled from the deepest recesses of her being. Each card was a mirror reflecting a piece of her fractured soul. The sight was overwhelming and tears welled in her eyes. Here, in this impossible room, her silent screams were finally being heard, written in letters of light for her to see. A sense of awe mixed with fear washed over her. This was a place of immense power, a place of truth. There were no masks here, no polite pretenses. The wish room demanded honesty. It stripped away the I'm fines and the brave faces, leaving only the raw, unvarnished truth of her pain and her longing. She had to choose. The unspoken rules of the room seemed to settle into her understanding. She could not have them all. She had to select the wishes that mattered most, the ones that could pave a path out of the wilderness she had been wandering in for so long. Emily's eyes scanned the glowing words, each one a testament to her suffering. I want my child back. I want to turn back time. I want him to feel my pain. These were the wishes of anger and raw grief, burning with a desperate, impossible heat. They called to her, promising the false comfort of revenge, or the sweet relief of a world rewritten. For a moment, she let herself feel their pull, the seductive whisper of what could never be. But she knew, with a clarity that surprised her, that these paths led only to more darkness, to a prison of her own making. They were chains, not keys. Her gaze then fell upon a card that glowed with a softer, more gentle light. It read, "I want to forgive myself." The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. She had blamed herself for everything, for not being careful enough, for not praying hard enough, for not being strong enough to hold her family together. The guilt was a heavy cloak she had worn every single day, its weight suffocating her. To forgive herself seemed like the most impossible task of all, yet she knew deep down that no healing could begin until she laid that burden down. With a deep breath, she picked up the card. It felt warm in her hand. Next, her eyes found the words that spoke to the deepest void within her. "I want to feel God again." This was the core of her loneliness. It was not just the loss of her child or her husband. It was the loss of her spiritual anchor. She missed the feeling of a divine presence, the comfort of believing she was part of a larger plan. She missed the simple, unshakable faith of her youth. To feel that connection again would be like finding water in a desert. It was a wish not for answers, but for presence, a plea to end the silence. She chose this card, adding it to the first. Finally, one last card seemed to pulse with a quiet, steady rhythm, different from the others. It read, "I want to heal others like me." The thought had been a fleeting whisper in her darkest moments, a strange and selfless impulse. She had seen the same hollow look in the eyes of other women at support groups, the same silent scream. The idea of using her own shattered pieces to help mend others was both terrifying and strangely compelling. It was a wish not for herself, but for a purpose beyond her own pain. It was a step toward the light. She chose this third and final card, holding the 3 wishes against her heart. As Emily held the 3 cards, their light merging into one brilliant gleam, a voice filled the room. It was not a sound that came through her ears, but a presence that resonated in her very soul. It was calm, powerful, and full of a love so profound it brought her to her knees. "Emily," the voice said, the name echoing with infinite tenderness, "you have chosen wisely. You have chosen not to erase your past, but to build a future from its ruins. You have chosen healing, faith, and purpose. This is the path of the heart." The words washed over her, cleansing the dust and grime from her spirit. "Your pain," the divine voice continued, its resonance growing stronger, "is not a punishment. Your scars are not a mark of failure. Look closer. Your trauma, the very thing that has broken you, can now become your sword. The darkness you have navigated has given you eyes to see others who are lost. Your grief has carved out a space in your heart for a greater compassion. The betrayals you have endured will teach you the true meaning of grace. Do not despise your journey, for it has forged you into a warrior of the light." The metaphor was powerful, transforming her image of herself from a victim to a victor. Emily looked down at her hands, no longer seeing them as empty, but as instruments waiting for a new task. The idea of an NGO, a thought that had once been a faint flicker, now burned within her like a steady flame. Soul therapy, a place for women who had lost their way, who felt abandoned by God and by life. A place where they could speak their truths without judgment, where they could learn that their trauma could also become their sword. The vision was so clear, so right, it felt as if it had been waiting for her all along. The wish room had not given her a new life, but had shown her how to live the one she had. She left the room and stepped back into the fading twilight, but the world looked different. The colors were sharper, the air felt cleaner. The crushing weight was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of mission. Emily Grace, the grieving teacher, the betrayed wife, the spiritually lost woman, had found her redemption. It was not in forgetting her pain, but in transforming it. She would build her haven, her soul therapy NGO, and in healing others, she would continue to heal herself. Her greatest sorrow had become her most profound calling, a testament to the fact that even in the deepest silence, a new song can begin.